Footnote: Manuel des Chevaliers de Ordre du Temple, page 8. None of these statements are susceptible of historical proof. The Order of Knights of St. Andrew or of the Thistle was not created by Bruce in 1314, but by James II in 1440. There is no evidence that the Templars ever made a part of the Royal Order of Heirdom. At this day the two are entirely distinct, nor is it now considered as a fact that the Royal Order was established by Bruce after the Battle of Bannockburn, although such is the esoteric legend. On the contrary, it is supposed to have been the fabrication of Michael Ramsay in the 18th century. On this subject, the remarks of Brother Lyon, who has made the Masonry of Scotland his especial study, are well worth citation. The ritual of the Royal Order of Scotland embraces, he says, what may be termed a spiritualization of the supposed symbols and ceremonies of the Christian architects and builders of primitive times, and so closely associates the sword with the trowel as to lead to the second degree being denominated an order of Masonic knighthood, which its recipients are asked to believe was first conferred on the field of Bannockburn as a reward for the valor that had been displayed by a body of Templars who aided Bruce in that memorable victory, and that afterward a Grand Lodge of the order was established by the king at Kilwinning, with the reservation of the office of Grand Master to him and his successors on the Scottish throne. It is further asserted that the Royal Order and the Masonic Fraternity of Kilwinning were governed by the same head. As regards the claims to antiquity and a royal origin that are advanced in favor of this right, it is proper to say that modern inquiries have shown these to be purely fabulous. The credence that is given to that part of the legend which associates the order with the ancient lodge of Kilwinning is based on the assumed certainty that that lodge possessed in former times a knowledge of other degrees of Masonry than those of St. John. But such is not the case. The fraternity of Kilwinning never at any period practiced or acknowledged other than the craft degrees. Neither does there exist any tradition worthy of the name local or national, nor has any authentic document yet been discovered that can in the remotest degree be held to identify Robert Bruce with the holding of Masonic courts or the institution of a secret society at Kilwinning. Footnote: History of the Lodge of Edinburgh by David Murray Lyon, Chapter 32, page 307. After such a statement made by a writer who, from his position and opportunities as a Scottish Mason, was better enabled to discover proofs, if there were any to be discovered, we may safely conclude that the Bruce and Bannockburn legend of Scottish Templarism is to be deemed a pure myth, without the slightest historical element to sustain it. There is another legend connecting the Templars in Scotland with Freemasonry which demands our attention. It is said in this legend that in order to escape from the persecution that followed the suppression of the order by the King of France, a certain Templar named D'Aumont, accompanied by 7 others disguised as mechanics or operative masons, fled into Scotland and there secretly founded another order, and to preserve as much as possible the ancient name of Templars, as well as to retain the remembrance of and to do honor to the masons in whose clothing they had disguised themselves when they fled. They adopted the name of Masons in connection with the word Frank and called themselves Frank Masons. This they did because the old Templars were for the most part Frenchmen, and as a word, Franc means both French and free. When they established themselves in England, they called themselves Freemasons. As the ancient order had been originally established for the purpose of rebuilding the Temple of Jerusalem, the new order maintained their bond of union and preserved the memory and the design of their predecessors by building symbolically spiritual temples consecrated to virtue, truth, and light, and to the honor of the grand architect of the universe. Such is the legend as given by a writer in the Dutch Freemasons' Almanac, from which it is cited in the London Freemasons' Quarterly Review. Footnote. See Freemasons' Quarterly Review, London, 1843, page 501, where the legend is given in full as above. Clavel, in his picturesque History of Freemasonry, footnote, Histoire pittoresque de la Franc-Maçonnerie, page 184, gives it more in detail, almost in the words of von Hund. After the execution of Desmoulins, Peter de Aumont, the provincial Grand Master of Auvergne, with 2 commanders and 5 knights, fled for safety and directed their course toward Scotland, concealing themselves during their journey under the disguise of operative masons. Having landed on the Scottish island of Mull, they there met the Grand Commander George Harris and several other brethren, with whom they resolved to continue the order. D'Aumont was elected Grand Master in a chapter held on St. John's Day, 1313, to protect themselves from all chance of discovery and persecution. They adopted symbols taken from architecture and assumed the title of Freemasons. In 1361, the Grand Master of the Temple transferred the seat of the order to the old city of Aberdeen, and from that time it spread, under the guise of Freemasonry, through Italy, Germany, France, Portugal, Spain, and other places. It was on this legend that the Baron von Hund founded his rite of strict observance, and with spurious documents in his possession he attempted, but without success, to obtain the sanction of the Congress of Wilhelmsbad to his dogma that every Freemason was a Templar. This doctrine, though making but slow progress in Germany, was more readily accepted in France, where already it had been promulgated by the chapter of Clermont, into whose Templar system von Hund had been initiated. The Chevalier Ramsay was the real author of the doctrine of the Templar origin of Freemasonry, and to him we are really indebted, if the debt have any value, for the Daumont legend. The source whence it sprang is tolerably satisfactory evidence of its fictitious character. The inventive genius of Ramsay, as exhibited in the fabrications of high degrees and Masonic legends, is well known. Nor, unfortunately, for his reputation can it be doubted that in the composition of his legends he cared but little for the support of history. If his genius, his learning, and his zeal had been consecrated, not to the formation of new Masonic systems, but to a profound investigation of the true origin of the institution, viewed only from an authentic historical point, it is impossible to say what incalculable benefit would have been derived from his researches. The unproductive desert, which for 3/4 of a century spread over the continent, bearing no fruit except fanciful theories, absurd systems, and unnecessary degrees, would have been occupied, in all probability, by a race of Masonic scholars whose researches would have been directed to the creation of a genuine history, and much of the labors of our modern iconoclasts would have been spared. The Masonic scholars of that long period, which began with Ramsay and has hardly yet wholly terminated, assumed for the most part rather the role of poets than of historians. They did not remember the wise saying of Cervantes, that the poet may say or sing, not as things have been, but as they ought to have been, while the historian must write of them as they really were, and not as he thinks they ought to have been. And hence we have a mass of traditional rubbish, in which there is a great deal of falsehood with very little truth. Of this rubbish is the legend of Peter Daumont and his resuscitation of the order of Knights Templars in Scotland. Without a particle of historical evidence for its support, it has nevertheless exerted a powerful influence on the Masonic organization of even the present day. We find its effects looming out in the most important rites and giving a Templar form to many of the high degrees. And it cannot be doubted that the incorporation of Templarism into the modern Masonic system is mainly to be attributed to ideas suggested by this Daumont legend. As there appears to be some difficulty in reconciling the supposed heretical opinions of the Templars with the strictly Christian faith of the Scottish Masons, to meet this objection a third legend was invented, in which it was stated that after the abolition of the Templars, the clerical part of the order, that is, the chaplains and priests, united in Scotland to revive it and to transplant it into Freemasonry. But as this legend has not met with many supporters and was never strongly urged, it is scarcely necessary to do more than thus briefly to allude to it.